Hello and welcome to Queendom TV, and today guys I'm going to be talking to you about a little thing that I've noticed, a little observation. For those of you who don't know, your girl is a scientist, and I like to think that I'm a scientist by nature, by personality, although I do have a degree as well. And so I pay a lot of attention as a scientist and also a Christian, which a lot of people think, how does those two things work together? Well, here she is. This is how it works. Anyway, one thing that I've noticed about scientists, but also historians, which funnily enough, I've actually always really enjoyed history, although even in school, I really liked history. But I realized after leaving school that history in school is not real, like, it's not like doing real history, but we're not going to talk about in this video. Oh, are we? We might a little bit. We'll come back to it. But one thing that I realized is that historians and scientists have a tendency to write things off if they just don't agree with stuff, right? So I look into a lot of things, and personally, as a woman of faith, I like to look at history. I like to look at what's happening in the world at a particular time, and then I like to find out what's happening, what the Bible says about what was also happening in the world at that particular time, and then I put all the pictures together. That's one of the ways that I kind of understand what's happening in the world, is I look at it from many different perspectives. Like if I look at, like, I might be in a particular time period, let's say I'm looking at the 1800s. I might look at what was happening in the 1800s in the UK. Then I might look at what was happening in the 1800s in Asia. Then I might look at what was happening in the 1800s, somewhere else. Or if I'm looking back in time, like the times of the Bible and stuff, maybe like the time of Jesus, I might look at, what was happening at the time of Jesus according to the Bible. What was happening that same time in the UK, in Asia, so on and so forth. I highly recommend researching in that way, by the way, guys, because I think sometimes when you see history from a particular perspective, it can skew the way you understand it. And I think historians and, a lot of people do that on purpose. But one thing that I've noticed is that historians and scientists have a little tendency to just brush certain things off when it suits them. And when I say brush certain things off, if they think that something isn't realistic to whatever they think, they'll just say, oh well, some people, because I don't know how I'm going to explain this. Okay, when it comes to history and science, right, there's a common thread between the two of them, that whatever is considered factual in history and science is always based on people who are of a certain level of recognition or qualification writing something to solidify that thing is a fact. So in terms of science, people write journals, they write journal articles. That's what people look up. When somebody does research, they write their research up as a journal article, and then people can read what was their hypothesis, what were they researching, what was whatever. And then once they see that, and then at the end it will say their conclusions. It shows their methods. It shows the references of who they have to include references, which for those of you who are in other areas who've done like degrees and stuff, you might feel like, oh, referencing was annoying. In things like science and history, it's especially important because you have to say where you even use that idea from, so people can also follow your thought track. That's kind of like how I look at it. People can follow your thought track as to how you got to your conclusion in science and stuff, or how you came up with whatever you came up with. In order to be published, you have to be published on, established, companies or journals. Your articles have to be published in the journals. It might be, and they all have their different names. It might be called something like the biological chemistry journal, and that might be one of the most highly recognized biological I didn't say biological chemistry journal, but yeah, biochemistry journal, right? That might be one of the most highest esteemed ones. And then scientists as a whole, based on the fact that it's one of the most highly recognized, will look at stuff that's on there as factual, right? And it kind of works similar with history. We have people who write history books, people who were around at a certain time. They have their writings. If they are highly esteemed or acknowledged in society, usually by the people in power, then those things are also considered factual, right? Here's the thing. In all those situations, it's just people writing stuff that they think or they've seen or they've understood. So the way I look at it is, it's a free-for-all, really, because somebody else could write something at the same time and it could be different to what that person is saying, and what's to say their version of events isn't also true. And that's why I don't think you can really trust a lot of the popular history and science, because one thing I definitely will say is that a lot of people benefit, a lot of the powers of today, a lot of the governments and people in power, they benefit off of what we think about history and what we know about the past, because what we know about the past dictates what we think now and what we think about the future, right? So for a lot of people, perfect example of this is within the Black community is the slave trade. Let's think about this. Let's think if nobody ever heard of the slave trade, and only people had only heard about, you know, the emperors and the empresses in Black countries. They'd only heard about positive things. A lot of Black people today wouldn't be feeling, you know, as much of a victim as they do feel without knowing that history, which is why I personally feel that the fact that they focus so much on that kind of history is on purpose to influence people in a particular way. And that's why they have a tendency also to brush off certain things. So they might say that something, and this is what I've noticed, like when you watch video, even when you watch videos on YouTube, guys, and this is why I like YouTube videos in terms as for forms of information more than I do books and stuff, because when you watch YouTube videos, you're usually finding a person who's independent, who can be somebody like myself, right, who's researching something, and if they're dedicated to just reporting what was said, they will tell you their opinion, but they will tell you what was said. When you find these channels that actually do it for informative purposes, so they might say it was found that in the time of the Vikings were said to always shave their heads on a new moon, right? I'm just making something up. Then the person might say, personally, based on the research that I found, I only found one source of it based on the fact that they were people that like to watch the moon. I kind of think that's pretty possible that they did. Or they might say, I don't think that's really true. I think that the historians just added it. You know, YouTubers and people like that, or independent sources are more likely to acknowledge that. Whereas a journal or a history channel, let's say, might be more inclined to, first of all, and this is where you guys have to like start to put all the pieces together of the stuff that I talk about. And if you go into my if you go into I have a playlist talking about the media and stuff. In there I talk about how the big 5 media giants of the world, they all own a lot of these different things. They own publishing companies, then they'll also own like maybe a history channel or a National Geographic and stuff like that. So go and check that out, right? It suits them in order to for their business, in order for what they want to do, to also give history in a favorable way that supports them. Now, I don't think they're going down to the nitty gritty always, but I definitely think there's certain things they're probably not letting out, you know, on purpose, or things that they're skewing on purpose, you know. So there's that, you know. Then on the science side of things as well, one thing that I have to point out about science is that, excuse me again, one thing I have to point out about science is that scientists, in order for somebody to acknowledge something as fact, right, you have to prove it in science, right? And so the problem with that is sometimes something can be something doesn't become true once it's proven. If it was true, it was always true. That's why I believe it's like the eternal nature of God, right? God is always there, and God is always true, and God is always God. So God's truths are eternal. It's not like it's now true because you know it. It was always true. That's the nature of truth, right? So with science, a lot of them will dismiss things and say that's not true, or we can't prove that, which stops people having certain knowledge about certain things. Perfect example of this, and I highly recommend this if you're somebody who's like into science and stuff. Here's a great example, right? Netflix has a series called Babies, right? And I love babies, by the way, guys. I love babies. Just waiting for my hubby to show up in my life whenever the Lord brings him, right? But I love babies, and I look forward to having children one day. I want to have as many children as the Lord will give me, and my husband is also wanting to have, you know? So I was watching this show Babies on Netflix, and it's really fascinating because on Babies, they talk about they talk a lot about the science of babies and what their capability is, because in terms of us as people, a lot of people assumed that babies were just these like dumb, thoughtless, like blobs of flesh, pretty much, that had to be taught everything. But what they realized in babies is that there's so many things about babies that they already have inbuilt, that they already got taught. They're already thinking so much. They're already discovering so much. They participate so much in their own growth, more than people realize. And they did a whole bunch of research, actual research, which you can watch some of the research on the Netflix show. That's why I say you guys should watch it. It's really good, right? Rather than some of the other trash that's on there. And that can be easily get you in, guys. We've all been there. We've all been caught up with trash on Netflix. So I think sometimes go for some of the good stuff, you know? There's so much good stuff on there. Let's watch that as well. Sorry, I'm just drinking my coffee. Anyway, so the thing that stuck out to me about this whole Netflix thing, right, is the fact that when you're watching this babies thing, so many times people would come up with a theory about babies, right? And they'll be like, well, I think that babies, it's something like, I think that babies already know how to walk when they're born. Be something like that, right? That'll be somebody's hypothesis. Then they'll do a certain amount of research to prove that, which satisfies their claims, you know? So they might do a couple of experiments. They get in like 50 babies. They do the stuff, yada, 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 and they prove it. They'll take it to whatever scientific committee, whatever, whoever, right? Organization that, and I'm doing this because it's just whoever the world, society, the government has decided is the governing body, which is just other people. It's just people. It's not God. So to me, I'm like, they're just people. But anywho, and they'll say, no, we deny that. We don't think that's true. Because as a scientist, when you do work, you have to be, your work gets critiqued and people can choose to accept your claims or not, right? That's a lot of the scientific community, which is also why it's an easily manipulated community, right? And then the people will go back and they'll say, okay, they didn't believe it. They critiqued me because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So they'll go back and do that A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they'll prove all those points wrong, what the people thought was wrong, and then eventually it'll be proven that their initial hypothesis was correct. Why am I pointing this stuff out? Why am I talking to you about babies? Because it's an awesome documentary on Netflix. But no, it's not because of that. Because we've got to understand that in this day and age, people are, when I feel like, and I do think it's because of something to do with the education system, which I can't remember if I made a video about this, but I feel like I did, about how you're not dumb. You know, I'm pretty sure I did a video titled something like, you're not dumb. The education system wants you to think you are, right? The problem is, because of the way society is today in history and the way that everything is all about what's your accolade, what's your qualification, we're too trusting in historians and scientists, right? Who a lot of the time pick and choose things based on their own biases. Because the thing about us as human beings, right? We have biases. I remember one thing I used to think about when I was a scientist, right? When I was studying for my degree, and we used to do experiments. And sometimes science, like the lecturers and stuff, they would make certain statements, right? So for example, you could say, like right now with my cup of coffee, right? You could go that my cup of coffee is getting colder over time because the heat is transferring out of the coffee, you know, into the atmosphere, and therefore my coffee is getting colder, right? People will say something like that. Then they might say, okay, we're gonna experiment. This is how scientists do it. We're going to experiment. So they'll make the cup of coffee, maybe put a thermometer in there. Then they'll have something else maybe on the outside to check the temperature just outside of the cup or whatever they'll do. And then they'll say, we're going to make a table and we're going to write down the temperature of the coffee itself and maybe the outer mug and the atmosphere just outside, all those three things every 30 seconds. We're going to evaluate, right? And then we're going to draw that into a graph. Right? And then the graph is going to have like, what was I saying in the beginning? Yeah. And then the graph will show like how the temperature is changing over time, right? So you might have time across the bottom, and then you might have, temperature on the y-axis. This is how it works in science, by the way, guys. This is how easy it is, right? So then you just plot all your points, and you go, oh, as time went on, the temperature went down, so you would have like a downward thing. Thus suggesting that when you leave coffee out, because of the temperature, whatever, the temperature's leaving, that's why the temperature of the coffee goes down, right? Here's the thing. True, but we don't actually know what other things could be at play here. Because these are chemicals and molecules and stuff like that. They have so many different things and so many different characteristics and ways that they just behave in things that we would not expect for them to do. So I'm using a very basic example, right? My point is that we don't know. A lot of the time, we're biased in what we think. The point of me pointing this out is that is my bias. My bias is that I'm assuming that the reason why this is happening is to do with heat, right? Could be to do with something else. Could be to do with something else. It could be, for all we know, something to do with the molecules of the actual things themselves. That actually they don't like each other and they try to release off their energy to get further away. Like, we don't know, guys, right? Well, we do know. And I'm not trying to like say to you guys to like second guess everything in science, because a lot of things are logic. That's why I like chemistry, because chemistry to me is logic. And I believe God is very logical. In fact, the another word that people use for the word of God is logos, like logic, right? So this whole thing that God and science don't work together, they absolutely do. Okay. So logos. So the reason why I'm saying this is that we don't know the considerations that we don't make because we don't know, because we are biased to what we might think could be going on, right? I'll give you an example of how this actually took place. There was a guy called Gregory Mendel, who is a scientist who I personally really liked when I heard about him. And he was a mathematician. People didn't even see him as a scientist. Prior to his research, people believed that men and women, when they had a child, the child would turn out to be exactly half of all the traits of the parents. So you'd come out as like the average of the heights of both your parents. You come out, the average is the skin color of both your parents, the average of maybe the eye color, and so on and so forth. Gregory Mendel was the one who had some peas, and he did an experiment crossbreeding peas, and he realized it's not that simple, because with the peas, he realized that certain genes were more dominant. Some of them were recessive. Some of you are probably getting flashbacks to science at school, right? He is the reason today we now see that it wasn't as simple as we initially thought from our bias, which is, well, when we see a child, and we see two people make a child, you have the parent, the mum, and the dad. The child looks something like in the middle of both of the parents, right? Something like an average of both of the parents. That's what people think, right? So do our bias makes us think that, but in reality, the science of it and the numbers, and he was a numbers guy. That's why I love numbers, people, and I love numbers myself. I'm a numbers gal, love numbers, right? The numbers proved otherwise. And the funny thing is, even when he was alive, nobody understood his research. It was only, I think, after he died that they translated it into being into science, because he was a mathematician. He just had all this stuff, all this data in numbers. And the science community, particularly the biology community, from what I understand, did not understand what that was all about until somebody was able to translate it into, when I say translate, I just mean, explain it and put it into more understandable terms for people who are not mathematicians. And that's why today we have such a developed understanding of how you have dominant genes, i.e. having brown eyes might be dominant. So if you have a child, you might be, based on the genes of your husband or whatever, it depends on how likely your child is to have brown eyes. And you can actually say that more precisely. But then even that isn't 100% true, because it's all probabilities. It's just you working out the probability, and the probabilities are like assessed over time. That's how you get to a probability. You do a whole bunch of experiments and then you find the average, and then that's what you go with, right? I hope I'm not losing anybody. So bias is very prominent in science and history, and that's why I think listen to things that people say, research into things, but take it with a grain of salt and be prepared to think for yourself. Be prepared to disagree and say, you know what? You might say this is what happened, but I heard this account and I heard that account and I heard that account. And those accounts make it seem more like this account of this is true. Because I'll tell you something, just like how scientists dismiss things that they don't agree with, they don't understand, it's the same way that historians dismiss things they don't agree with. I'm a person of faith. So when I hear people talking about stuff like, and people were doing rituals at this time, a historian who doesn't believe in spiritual things might write that off. To me, I might go, actually, I think that happened. And then I'll go, actually, I'm going to look in my Bible. And then I check in my Bible. And in my Bible, it talks about something like that happening at that time. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, it happened. Because obviously I believe the Bible is true. So I say all of that to say, and obviously you guys don't all have to be like scientists, or, you know, you don't all have the same, you know, viewpoints as me. So it's not about having the same viewpoint, but it's just about appreciating that, you know, a lot of the stuff in the world today is biased. It is very biased, unfortunately. And so we have to be careful to make sure that we are not getting caught up and just believing things because somebody says it. Because I think a lot of people in the world nowadays, the more we're going on, they're actually loving how much we just believe everything that they say. Because as long as you do that, they have the power. As long as you trust them. That's why I'm keen on talking about things like science and talk about things like maths and all these things that scare a lot of people away. The reason why I like to talk about them is because if you can understand it for yourself, then you can judge it for yourself. Then you can judge also if the people you're listening to are trustworthy. You know, I believe that God gives us the opportunity. I don't believe there is any. I believe God gives us all the opportunity to have full understanding of anything that we need, that we want to understand, in order to be able to live our life with maintaining the fullness of our free will. What do I mean by that? It means that I believe that you should be able to understand what's happening enough so that you can make the right decisions that you'd be happy with. And I think a lot of people in the world today, politicians, governments, people in power, you know, big tech, big people who are high up in society or highly influential, they take advantage of the fact that people don't know. People they take advantage of the fact of using like fancy language. Like, it reminds me of one of my lecturers that I had at university, and he was one of those people where bless his heart, one of my lecturers at university, he used to do this thing where he used to like always say stuff in like a really overly sophisticated way with unnecessary vocabulary. So for example, I'll give you an example. The question on the board could be 1 + 1. Now, we weren't doing 1 + 1, of course, but I'm just using that for the sake of explaining to you what it'd be like. And the way he would talk about it would be like this: when dealing with the paradox of 1 summed to 1, it would be advised to address the nature of each party involved and the full extent to which its existence in relation to the existence of the other when put together would be understood. And he'd just talk like this, like he'd just say stuff like that. Like he'd be like, and then once you have understood the two, like he would just overdo it. Whereas you could just say 1 + 1. What do you have when you have 2 1s? 2 1s is 2. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? In the same way that I just broke down this whole temperature thing, a lot of people would like overly make chemistry make it really difficult to understand. For what purpose? So that you don't understand, so that you can't make the right decisions for yourself. And that's why I'm a massive advocate of let's all know and understand and be informed about the things that are going on in the world and science and history. And let even if it's going to be me, I will try my best all my days to explain to people in more simple terms, because it's not about like simpling things down because people are dumb. It's simpling things down because things are simple. Things are really simple. There are a lot of complex things. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of complex things. I had many a headache when I was at university, and also before university, you know, getting my head around a lot of stuff. But a lot of the stuff that people need to understand, it's not that difficult, you know. And so I'm saying all of this to say that we as a society, we need to just ditch this idea that we are so dumb and that we need to rely on other people to tell us how things work. We don't. A lot of information you can do for yourself. There's so many great channels on YouTube as well. I love YouTube. Like Oversimplified is a great one. They do a lot of historical stuff. They'll get a whole history down into 20 minutes. I did history, you know, at secondary school. My goodness, the history I've learned on Oversimplified is way better, way more memorable. And I'm like, I didn't even learn half of this history when I learned about the exact same thing. You know? So I think it's important, you know, for us as society now to acknowledge that, first of all, scientists and historians are biased. When they don't agree with something, when they don't see something, when they don't understand it, they have no problem just disregarding it. if they're able to do that, and these are the people that we're trusting, you have the right to do your own research and make your own judgment. I think one thing about God that I really love, and the reason why I'm always talking about him, because he's my Lord, he's my dad, I love him, right? Is because he is the kind of person who says, I want you to be able to believe for yourself. I believe God doesn't want us to believe in anything. God doesn't expect us to fake believing in anything. He wants us to fully, really believe in it. So if I'm going to say that I believe he exists, then he doesn't want me to just say that if I don't believe it. He wants me to believe it and do whatever, and he's prepared to help me to believe it, to give me what is necessary for me to believe that. And I believe it's not just like that with him. I believe it's like that with other things. I believe with other things, it's the same thing. Like, in order for you to believe something, you are allowed, you are in fact suggested to even have the right to make sure that you actually understand and believe and have your reasons why you believe in something. You know, because I think nowadays we're just too reliant on others, and I get it. You know, a lot of people in the world are like making themselves look like they really got our best interest at heart, and they're really trying to help us. They're really not, unfortunately, a lot of them. But anyways, I don't want to go on and on and on. I just wanted to say why it's important for us, you know, to look when we're dealing with like historians and stuff. Remember that they're writing off things themselves. They're ignoring things, and that you can be a historian and you can be a scientist all for yourself. It's not about a degree. It's not about qualification. It's about how you do. If you want to be a scientist, become observant. Start taking in data. When I say data, it could just be things that you notice, right? Science would be like if you have a pond near where you live and you start paying attention to the ducks, and you notice the ducks always do this at this time and they do that at that time. That's an observation. That's a scientific observation. Somewhere in the world you could get paid to do that, right? As a scientist, as a historian, look into history for yourself. Go and visit places. Speak to people who are from those places. Be your own historian and be your own scientist. Trust me, you're going to need that. And we're all going to need that from now onwards, you know, especially with the craziness of the world. It's time for us to start knowing things for ourselves. And so that when people are telling us stuff, we can make a judgment and we can also think for ourselves. Because I'll tell you something, guys, when we can't think for ourselves, it means that somebody else is thinking for us. And we cannot guarantee that that person is thinking the best for us. In fact, I personally am of the assumption that majority of people are, rather than wanting the best for you, are actually wanting not the best for you, because usually what's not the best for you is more beneficial to them, because usually helping somebody and doing what's right for somebody is more effort than doing what just suits you only. Not to sound like a Debbie Downer, praise the Lord that he isn't like that, praise Jesus. Just thought I would give you guys that advice. Other than that, God bless you all. I know this is a different video, but y'all know I just come through with whatever I come through on here. Other than that, I'll see you guys in my next one. Goodbye.